The mahogany-paneled courtroom felt suffocating as Rebecca Chun sat quietly at the defendant's table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Across the aisle, her husband of 15 years, Marcus Wellington, adjusted his Italian silk tie with the same arrogant confidence that had once made her heart flutter. Now it just made her stomach turn. His girlfriend, a bleached blonde 20-something named Brittany, sat behind him in the gallery, her Louboutin heels tapping impatiently against the marble floor. Judge Patricia Hayworth peered over her wire-rimmed glasses as Marcus's attorney, a sharp-suited man named Theodore Blackwood, rose to address the court. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors where Rebecca's future hung in the balance. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, his custom-tailored charcoal suit speaking of success and authority. He had always been handsome in that distinguished way that opened doors and charmed investors. Rebecca remembered how proud she used to feel walking into galas on his arm, back when she still believed his version of their story. Theodore Blackwood cleared his throat dramatically. "Your Honor, this case is quite straightforward. My client, Marcus Wellington, built a successful consulting empire from nothing while supporting his wife and their 2 children. Mrs. Wellington, as she'll admit, spent the entirety of their marriage as a housewife. She raised their children, yes, but contributed nothing to the financial foundation of their family. Mr. Wellington seeks only fair distribution of the assets he worked tirelessly to accumulate." Rebecca's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Sterling, remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable. She had insisted Rebecca trust the process, though every instinct screamed to defend herself against these lies. Marcus stood when called to testify, his confident swagger filling the courtroom. He placed his hand on the Bible with the same authority he used to command boardrooms. After being sworn in, he faced the judge with practiced sincerity. "Your Honor," Theodore Blackwood began, "please tell the court about your wife's role during your marriage." Marcus straightened his shoulders. "My wife has been a stay-at-home mother for the past 15 years. While I built Wellington Consulting from the ground up, working 18-hour days, traveling constantly to secure clients, Rebecca focused on domestic duties. She never worked outside the home, never contributed to our business ventures, and frankly showed little interest in financial matters." Behind him, Brittany nodded approvingly, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she gestured. She had been Marcus's secretary for 2 years before becoming something more, though Rebecca had known about the affair long before Marcus thought she did. The judge made notes, her pen scratching against paper. "Mr. Wellington, in your opinion, what would constitute fair division of marital assets?" Marcus cleared his throat. "Given that I built everything we own through my own efforts, I believe my wife should receive spousal support and perhaps a modest settlement. Enough to live comfortably, of course, but nothing that would compromise the business I've spent decades developing. If you're watching from somewhere that values justice, you probably already feel your blood boiling. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because I have a feeling this story might hit different depending on whether you've seen this kind of arrogance up close." Theodore Blackwood nodded approvingly. "Your Honor, we've prepared extensive documentation showing Mr. Wellington's sole ownership of Wellington Consulting, his personal investment accounts, and the real estate holdings he accumulated through his business acumen. Mrs. Wellington's name appears on none of these documents in any capacity beyond beneficiary designations typical of married couples." Rebecca watched Marcus perform, remembering the countless nights he had come home late, smelling of expensive wine and Brittany's perfume, complaining about the stress of running everything alone. How many times had he sighed dramatically about carrying the entire family's financial burden? How many dinner parties where he had patted her hand condescendingly while telling guests that Rebecca kept busy with charity work and mother things? Victoria Sterling finally stirred, making a brief note on her legal pad. Rebecca caught her eye, and her attorney gave the slightest nod. "Patience," that look said. "Let him hang himself." Marcus continued his testimony with growing confidence. "My wife has many wonderful qualities as a mother, but business has never been her strength. She preferred shopping with friends, organizing charity luncheons, that sort of thing. I never burdened her with financial decisions because, frankly, she wasn't interested and lacked the background to contribute meaningfully." Brittany actually smirked from the gallery, leaning forward as if enjoying a particularly entertaining show. She wore a cream-colored dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her designer purse. Rebecca wondered if the young woman had any idea where the money for that lifestyle actually came from. Judge Hayworth looked up from her notes. "Mr. Wellington, did your wife ever express interest in your business affairs?" Marcus waved dismissively. "Occasionally she'd ask how my day went, but when I tried to explain complex financial strategies or client negotiations, her eyes would glaze over. She was much happier discussing the children's school activities or planning our social calendar. I learned early in our marriage not to burden her with business concerns." Rebecca's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She remembered those conversations differently. She remembered asking thoughtful questions about market trends and strategic decisions, only to be told that she wouldn't understand, that he had everything handled, that she should focus on what she did best. The morning wore on with Marcus painting himself as a self-made success story and Rebecca as a pleasant but financially irrelevant housewife. He described building Wellington Consulting through pure determination, networking with high-profile clients, and making investment decisions that grew their wealth exponentially. Through it all, he maintained, Rebecca had remained blissfully uninvolved in anything requiring actual business knowledge. Theodore Blackwood introduced financial statements, tax returns, and business registration documents, all bearing Marcus's signature and his alone. The evidence seemed overwhelming in its consistency, a paper trail of masculine success and feminine domesticity. But Victoria Sterling continued to sit quietly, occasionally jotting notes, her expression revealing nothing. Rebecca had hired her based on reputation alone. The attorney's track record in complex divorce cases spoke for itself. Victoria Sterling didn't lose, especially when her clients had been underestimated. As the morning session drew to a close, Marcus stepped down from the witness stand with visible satisfaction. He had performed exactly as rehearsed, presenting himself as the successful provider and Rebecca as the dependent spouse. Brittany beamed at him from the gallery, probably already planning how they'd celebrate what seemed like an inevitable victory. Judge Hayworth announced a brief recess before the defense would present their case. As people began filing out, Marcus turned to Theodore Blackwood with a confident grin. "I think that went exactly as we hoped," he said, his voice carrying just enough for Rebecca to hear. She always knew her place in this marriage. Now the court knows it too. Rebecca remained seated, watching her husband and his girlfriend exit together, his hand possessively on her lower back. They moved like people who had already won, like people whose version of reality had never been seriously challenged. Victoria Sterling finally spoke, her voice low and measured. "Are you ready for this, Rebecca?" Rebecca nodded slowly, thinking of all the years she had stayed quiet, all the time she had let Marcus take credit, all the nights she had worked while he slept, believing his success was their success. She thought about the spreadsheets hidden in her home office, the business relationships he had never bothered to understand, and the empire built on foundations he had never even seen. The afternoon session would tell a very different story. When court reconvened after lunch, Marcus Wellington returned with even more swagger than before. He had clearly spent the break receiving congratulations from his legal team, and Brittany had somehow managed to secure a seat in the front row of the gallery, directly behind the plaintiff's table. Her presence felt deliberate, calculated to maximize Rebecca's humiliation. Judge Hayworth called the court to order as Victoria Sterling rose to begin the defense's presentation. But before she could speak, Theodore Blackwood interrupted with a theatrical clearing of his throat. "Your Honor, if I may, we have additional witnesses who can corroborate Mr. Wellington's testimony about his wife's role in their marriage." The judge nodded, and Blackwood called his first witness, David Chamberlain, Marcus's business partner and longtime friend. David strode to the witness stand with the confidence of a man who had never questioned the natural order of things. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his Armani suit impeccable, and his Rolex caught the afternoon light as he raised his hand to be sworn in. "David," Theodore began, "how long have you known Marcus Wellington?" "Nearly 20 years, David replied, his voice carrying the authority of old money and older connections. "We met when he was just starting Wellington Consulting. I've watched him build that company from nothing into the powerhouse it is today. In all your business dealings with Mr. Wellington, have you ever interacted professionally with his wife, Rebecca?" David actually chuckled, a sound that made Rebecca's skin crawl. Rebecca is lovely, of course, but she's never been involved in business discussions. Marcus has always been very protective of her, keeping her focused on family matters while he handled the demanding world of corporate consulting. She attended company Christmas parties and spouse events, naturally, but nothing requiring actual business knowledge. Marcus nodded approvingly from his seat, while Brittany leaned forward with obvious satisfaction. Rebecca could feel the weight of their combined smugness pressing down on her like a physical force. Theodore continued his questioning. In your opinion, who built Wellington Consulting? Without question, Marcus did. David's voice grew stronger, more emphatic. I've seen him work 18-hour days, travel across the country closing deals, make the tough decisions that separate successful entrepreneurs from dreamers. Rebecca supported him by maintaining their home and caring for their children, which is valuable in its own way, but the business success is entirely Marcus's achievement. Victoria Sterling made a note, her expression still unreadable. Rebecca wondered what her attorney was thinking, what strategy lay behind this apparent passivity in the face of such systematic character assassination. The afternoon wore on with a parade of witnesses, each one reinforcing Marcus's narrative with devastating effectiveness. His accountant testified about Marcus's singular control over financial decisions. His former secretary, a stern woman named Margaret Frost, described how Rebecca rarely called the office and seemed disinterested in business matters when she did. Even their country club's president spoke about Rebecca's involvement in charity committees, painting her as pleasantly social but intellectually lightweight. With each testimony, Marcus's confidence grew more visible. He sat straighter, smiled more broadly, occasionally turning to make eye contact with Brittany. The afternoon session was becoming his coronation, a public affirmation of everything he had always believed about himself and his marriage. But the most damaging witness was yet to come. Theodore called Caroline Ashworth, Rebecca's former friend and fellow charity board member. Caroline approached the stand with obvious reluctance, but her testimony proved devastating. Caroline, how would you describe Rebecca's interests and activities during her marriage? Caroline's voice was soft but clear. Rebecca was always very focused on the children and our charity work. She organized beautiful fundraising galas and was quite gifted at event planning. But whenever conversation turned to business or finances, she would change the subject. She often said that Marcus handled all that complicated stuff, and she preferred not to worry about it. Rebecca felt her heart sink as her former friend continued. I remember one particular conversation where several of us wives were discussing our husband's work, and Rebecca actually said she was grateful that Marcus never expected her to understand business because numbers gave her a headache. She seemed quite proud of being able to focus entirely on family and social obligations. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, ever had people dismiss your intelligence or capability, you know exactly how Rebecca feels right now. The frustration of watching people rewrite your story while you sit powerless to stop them is something that cuts deep, no matter where you're experiencing it from. The testimony was particularly brutal because Caroline delivered it with apparent sadness, as if she truly believed she was helping establish the truth about her friend. Rebecca remembered that conversation differently, remembered making that comment as a defensive response to the other wives' subtle competitiveness about their husband's success, not as a genuine confession of intellectual inadequacy. As Caroline stepped down, Marcus actually reached back to squeeze Brittany's hand. The gesture was brief but unmistakable, a public claiming of his new life built on the foundation of his old one's destruction. Theodore Blackwood then presented what he called the conclusive evidence of Rebecca's unemployed status. He submitted tax returns showing Rebecca with no reported income for 15 years, bank statements listing Marcus as the primary account holder, and insurance policies naming him as the policyholder. The paper trail painted an unambiguous picture of financial dependence. Your Honor, Theodore announced with theatrical solemnity, the evidence is overwhelming. Mrs. Wellington lived a comfortable life as a supported spouse, while Mr. Wellington built their financial security through his own efforts. Any attempt to claim otherwise contradicts 15 years of documented reality. Marcus stood briefly to accept his lawyer's congratulations, his movements radiating triumph. Brittany actually applauded softly from the gallery, earning a sharp look from Judge Hayworth, but no formal rebuke. Finally, Victoria Sterling rose to begin cross-examination. The courtroom fell silent as Rebecca's attorney approached David Chamberlain, who remained on the stand. "Mr. Chamberlain," Victoria began, her voice calm and professional, "you testified that you never had business interactions with Mrs. Wellington. Is it possible that such interactions occurred without your direct knowledge?" Theodore objected before David could answer. "Calls for speculation, Your Honor." "Sustained," Judge Hayworth ruled. Victoria nodded as if she had expected the objection. "Mr. Chamberlain, are you familiar with the day-to-day operations of Wellington Consulting, or do you interact primarily with Mr. Wellington himself?" David shifted slightly in his seat. "I deal mostly with Marcus directly. Yes. He's the face of the company, the decision-maker. So you wouldn't necessarily know about behind-the-scenes activities or support functions." "I suppose not. But Marcus would have mentioned if Rebecca was involved in any meaningful way." "Would he?" Victoria asked quietly, and something in her tone made the courtroom feel suddenly charged. Rebecca felt a flutter of hope mixed with terror. Whatever Victoria was planning, it was about to begin. The afternoon session ended with that question hanging in the air, its implications unclear but somehow ominous. As people filed out, Marcus and Brittany lingered, discussing dinner plans with obvious satisfaction. They moved like conquerors, like people whose victory was so assured they could afford to be generous in celebrating it early. But Victoria Sterling gathered her files with the methodical precision of someone following a carefully orchestrated plan. She had let Marcus and his witnesses build their narrative exactly as they wanted, had offered minimal resistance to their character assassination of Rebecca. Rebecca finally understood why. Victoria hadn't been defending against their attacks because she didn't need to. She had been letting them commit fully to a version of reality that she was about to systematically dismantle. Tomorrow would bring a very different kind of testimony, and Marcus Wellington's confident smile was about to become a very expensive mistake. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that seemed to promise revelations. Marcus Wellington entered the courtroom with the same swagger as the previous day, his confidence apparently unshakable. Brittany had chosen a red dress for the occasion, a bold statement that seemed to celebrate their anticipated victory. She settled into her front row seat with the satisfaction of someone whose future was assured. Victoria Sterling, however, appeared transformed. Where she had been passive and observational the day before, she now moved with predatory precision. She carried a thick folder of documents and wore an expression that made Theodore Blackwood shift uncomfortably in his seat. "Your Honor," Victoria announced as court was called to session, "the defense would like to present our evidence regarding the true nature of the Wellington family's financial arrangements." Judge Hayworth nodded, gesturing for Victoria to proceed. Marcus leaned back in his chair, clearly expecting more of the weak resistance his attorney had easily demolished the previous day. Victoria approached the court clerk with her first exhibit. "Your Honor, I would like to submit for evidence the Articles of Incorporation for Meridian Strategic Solutions, LLC, filed with the Secretary of State on March 15, 2006. Theodore Blackwood looked confused. "Your Honor, I object. This appears to be irrelevant to the matter at hand. We're discussing the assets of Wellington Consulting, not some unrelated business entity." "On the contrary," Victoria replied smoothly, "this document is extremely relevant to the disposition of marital assets. If I may continue, the relevance will become abundantly clear." Judge Hayworth examined the document briefly. "Proceed, Counselor." Victoria turned to face the courtroom, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "This incorporation document establishes Meridian Strategic Solutions as a limited liability company with a single member and managing director. That individual is Rebecca Chin Wellington, filed under her maiden name as is legally permissible for business entities." Marcus's confident expression flickered for the first time. He leaned forward slightly, as if straining to hear something that couldn't possibly be true. "Furthermore," Victoria continued, "the filing date of March 15, 2006, is significant because it predates Mr. and Mrs. Wellington's marriage by 7 months. Mrs. Wellington established this business entity as a single woman, using her own resources, before any marital relationship existed." The first crack appeared in Marcus's facade. His eyebrows drew together in confusion, and he turned to whisper urgently to Theodore Blackwood. Brittany's confident posture stiffened as she sensed the shift in courtroom energy. "Your Honor," Victoria announced, "I'd like to call Mrs. Patricia Holloway to the stand." A distinguished woman in her early 60s rose from the gallery. She wore a perfectly tailored navy suit and carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. Rebecca recognized her immediately, though Marcus appeared to be seeing her for the first time. After being sworn in, Patricia settled into the witness chair with practiced ease. "Mrs. Holloway, please state your relationship to the defendant." Patricia's voice was clear and professional. "I am the Chief Financial Officer of Holloway Industries, and I have served as Mrs. Wellington's primary business consultant and strategic advisor for the past 12 years. Marcus's face went pale. He had never heard Patricia's name mentioned in his house, never seen her at any social functions, never had any indication that Rebecca had business relationships extending back over a decade. "Mrs. Holloway," Victoria continued, "can you describe the nature of your professional relationship with Rebecca Wellington?" "Certainly," Patricia replied, her tone becoming warmer. Rebecca established Meridian Strategic Solutions as a consulting firm specializing in operational efficiency and strategic planning. My company became one of her first major clients in 2007. Since then, Meridian has provided comprehensive consulting services for our manufacturing operations, logistics optimization, and expansion planning. Theodore Blackwood rose shakily to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This testimony lacks foundation. There's no evidence that this alleged consulting relationship has any bearing on the marital assets under consideration." Victoria smiled for the first time all morning. "Your Honor, if counsel will allow me to continue, the foundation will become crystal clear." Judge Hayworth nodded. "I'll allow it. But get to the point quickly, Counselor." "Mrs. Holloway," Victoria continued, "what has been the financial value of the services Meridian Strategic Solutions has provided to your company?" Patricia consulted a tablet she had brought with her. "Over the 12-year period of our relationship, Holloway Industries has paid Meridian Strategic Solutions approximately $4.7 million in consulting fees. This year alone, our contract is valued at $650,000. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Brittany's face had gone ashen, and Marcus looked like he had been physically struck. Theodore Blackwood frantically shuffled through his papers, searching for some explanation that would make this testimony disappear. "Mrs. Holloway," Victoria pressed on relentlessly, "when you conduct business with Meridian Strategic Solutions, who do you deal with directly?" "Always with Rebecca," Patricia replied firmly. "She is the sole proprietor, the strategic mind behind every proposal, and the individual who oversees all project implementation. I have never, in 12 years of business relationship, dealt with anyone else from her organization." But the revelations were just beginning. Victoria approached the witness with another document. "Mrs. Holloway, do you recognize this contract?" Patricia examined the papers briefly. "Yes, this is our current strategic consulting agreement with Meridian Strategic Solutions, signed 3 months ago. Can you identify the signature on this contract?" Patricia smiled slightly. "That's Rebecca's signature, of course. As the managing director of Meridian, she's the only person authorized to execute contracts on behalf of the company." Marcus was no longer leaning back in his chair. He sat forward, gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white with tension. The confident man who had testified yesterday about his wife's complete lack of business acumen was watching that carefully constructed narrative crumble in real time. Victoria continued her methodical destruction. "Mrs. Holloway, in your professional opinion, what level of business expertise would be required to provide the services Meridian offers your company?" Patricia's answer was delivered with scientific precision. "The strategic consulting that Rebecca provides requires advanced knowledge of supply chain management, financial analysis, market forecasting, and operational optimization. She regularly presents detailed reports to our board of directors and has been instrumental in decisions affecting millions of dollars in company operations. The level of sophistication required for this work would be comparable to that of a senior executive at any major corporation." The courtroom had fallen completely silent except for the frantic scribbling of the court reporter. Even Judge Hayworth was leaning forward, clearly engrossed in testimony that was rewriting everything she thought she knew about this case. "Mrs. Holloway," Victoria asked, Have you ever had any business interaction with Marcus Wellington? Patricia looked genuinely puzzled by the question. No, none whatsoever. I wasn't even aware of his existence until Rebecca mentioned her marriage plans in 2006. He has never been involved in any aspect of our business relationship, and frankly, I'm not sure why he would be. Marcus's transformation was complete. The arrogant, dismissive husband of yesterday had been replaced by a man whose entire worldview was collapsing. He turned to stare at Rebecca with an expression of complete bewilderment, as if seeing her for the first time. Brittany's confident smirk had vanished entirely. She sat rigid in her chair, her designer purse clutched protectively against her chest, as if trying to shield herself from the implications of what she was hearing. But Victoria Sterling was far from finished. As Mrs. Holloway stepped down, Victoria announced her next witness. Your Honor, I'd like to call Mr. James Morrison to the stand. Another distinguished figure rose from the gallery, this one a silver-haired man in an expensive charcoal suit. He moved with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to congressional hearings and federal oversight. After being sworn in, Mr. Morrison identified himself as the Senior Vice President of Operations for Davidson Federal Contracting, one of the largest government contracting firms in the region. Mr. Morrison, Victoria began, does your company have a business relationship with Meridian Strategic Solutions? Indeed we do, Morrison replied in a voice trained by decades of high-level presentations. Meridian has been our primary strategic consultant for government compliance and operational efficiency since 2009. Their work has been instrumental in helping us secure and maintain several major federal contracts. And who at Meridian Strategic Solutions manages this relationship? Rebecca Wellington, exclusively, Morrison answered without hesitation. She's brilliant, frankly. Her understanding of federal regulations and procurement processes is exceptional. Our company has saved millions of dollars in operational costs thanks to her strategic recommendations. Marcus was now staring at his hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The husband who had spent 15 years dismissing his wife's intelligence was learning that she had been operating at a level of business sophistication that dwarfed his own achievements. Mr. Morrison, Victoria continued, what is the annual value of the consulting contract between Davidson Federal and Meridian Strategic Solutions? Morrison consulted his notes briefly. Our current 3-year contract, signed last year, is valued at $1.2 million annually. Rebecca's firm has been one of our most valuable strategic partners. Theodore Blackwood made a final, desperate attempt to object. Your Honor, even if this business relationship exists, there's no evidence connecting it to the marital assets under consideration. Victoria Sterling turned to face him with a smile that could have frozen hell itself. Mr. Blackwood, I assure you that the connection between Meridian Strategic Solutions and the assets you claim belong solely to your client will become abundantly clear very shortly. As Mr. Morrison stepped down, Marcus Wellington finally understood that his carefully constructed world was not just cracking. It was about to shatter completely. Victoria Sterling approached the witness stand with the measured pace of someone about to detonate a financial nuclear bomb. Her next witness was a woman whose very presence seemed to command respect, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, one of the most renowned forensic accountants on the East Coast. Elena carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had unraveled the finances of Fortune 500 companies and exposed fraud schemes worth hundreds of millions. Dr. Rodriguez, Victoria began after the witness was sworn in. Please describe your professional qualifications for the court. Elena's voice was crisp and precise. I hold a doctorate in forensic accounting from Stanford. I'm a certified public accountant, and I've served as an expert witness in over 200 cases involving complex financial analysis. I've been retained to conduct a comprehensive examination of all financial records related to the Wellington marriage and associated business entities. Marcus Wellington was now visibly sweating despite the courtroom's cool temperature. Theodore Blackwood shuffled through his papers with increasing desperation, clearly unprepared for the scope of what was about to unfold. Dr. Rodriguez, Victoria continued, what did your investigation reveal about the true ownership structure of Wellington Consulting? Elena opened a thick folder and withdrew the first of many documents. Wellington Consulting, which Mr. Wellington claims to have built independently, is actually a subsidiary of Meridian Strategic Solutions. The business registration documents show that Meridian holds 100% ownership of Wellington Consulting through a complex but legally sound corporate structure. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Brittany went white as a sheet, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge of her seat. Marcus looked like he was about to vomit. Furthermore, Elena continued with clinical detachment. All major business decisions for Wellington Consulting require dual signatures from both the managing director of Meridian Strategic Solutions, which is Mrs. Wellington, and the operating manager of Wellington Consulting, which is Mr. Wellington. However, Mrs. Wellington's signature as the parent company director takes legal precedence in all matters. Theodore Blackwood shot to his feet. Objection. This is clearly fabricated evidence designed to mislead the court. Judge Hayworth's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Mr. Blackwood, that's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence that these documents are fraudulent? Theodore faltered, realizing he had overplayed his hand. No, Your Honor, but the timing seems suspicious. Dr. Rodriguez addressed the court directly. Your Honor, all documents I'm presenting have been verified through independent sources including the Secretary of State's office, the Internal Revenue Service, and multiple banking institutions. I stake my professional reputation on their authenticity. Victoria nodded approvingly and continued her systematic destruction. Dr. Rodriguez, what did your analysis reveal about the funding sources for Wellington Consulting's operations? Elena's next revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Every major capital investment in Wellington Consulting can be traced directly to Meridian Strategic Solutions. The initial startup capital of $200,000, the office lease deposits, the equipment purchases, the hiring of staff, even Mr. Wellington's salary for the first 3 years of operation, all funded through Meridian. Marcus was now gripping the edge of the defendant's table so hard his knuckles had gone completely white. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly as he tried to process what he was hearing. The forensic accountant continued with relentless precision. Bank records show that Mr. Wellington has never made an independent financial decision regarding Wellington Consulting without Mrs. Wellington's prior approval. Every loan application bears her signature as the guarantor. Every major client contract required her review and authorization as the parent company's managing director. Brittany had begun crying silently, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face as she realized the man she thought was wealthy was actually an employee of the woman she had helped humiliate. But Elena Rodriguez was just getting started. The most significant finding of my investigation concerns the client relationships that Mr. Wellington claims to have developed independently. Of Wellington Consulting's 12 major clients, 11 were originally secured through Meridian Strategic Solutions and then transferred to the subsidiary as part of Mrs. Wellington's business development strategy. Victoria approached the witness stand with another thick folder. Dr. Rodriguez, can you explain to the court the true scope of Mrs. Wellington's business empire? Elena's testimony now took on the tone of someone presenting a doctoral dissertation. Meridian Strategic Solutions operates 4 subsidiary companies in addition to Wellington Consulting. These include Pinnacle Logistics Management, Apex Government Relations, Sterling Financial Advisory, and Cornerstone Operations Consulting. The combined annual revenue of these entities exceeds $12 million, with Mrs. Wellington holding controlling interest in all of them. The revelation hit the courtroom like a tsunami. Marcus actually slumped forward in his chair, his face buried in his hands. The confident businessman of 2 days ago had been revealed as little more than a well-paid manager in his wife's corporate empire. Victoria pressed on mercilessly. Dr. Rodriguez, what was Mr. Wellington's actual role in this business structure? Elena consulted her notes with scientific precision. Mr. Wellington served as the public face of Wellington Consulting, attending client meetings and presenting proposals that were researched, developed, and approved by Mrs. Wellington's team at Meridian. His role was essentially that of a senior sales representative with limited decision-making authority. Theodore Blackwood was now frantically writing notes, probably calculating how to minimize the damage to his own reputation from this catastrophic miscalculation. The forensic accountant's next revelation was even more devastating. All business relationships that Mr. Wellington claims as his own achievements were actually managed through Mrs. Wellington's primary consulting contracts. When Wellington Consulting appeared to land a new client, that client had typically been working with Meridian Strategic Solutions for months or years beforehand. Dr. Rodriguez produced a timeline that showed the true sequence of business development. For example, Morrison Federal Contracting, which Mr. Wellington claimed as one of his biggest successes, had been working with Mrs. Wellington through Meridian for 3 years before Wellington Consulting was even formally incorporated as a subsidiary. Marcus finally looked up from his hands, his eyes wild with desperate confusion. "How?" he whispered to Theodore, his voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "How is this possible?" Elena Rodriguez answered the question with professional thoroughness. Mrs. Wellington operated what's known as a stealth management structure, allowing her husband to believe he was making independent decisions while actually operating within parameters she had established. It's a sophisticated business model that protected both the parent company's interests and Mr. Wellington's sense of professional autonomy. The revelation of Rebecca's business genius was complete, but Victoria Sterling had one final bombshell to deliver. "Dr. Rodriguez, what did your investigation reveal about the personal assets Mr. Wellington claims to have accumulated independently?" Elena's final testimony was delivered with the gravity of someone pronouncing a death sentence. Every significant asset claimed by Mr. Wellington, including their primary residence, vacation home, investment portfolio, and luxury vehicles, was purchased with funds that can be traced directly to Meridian Strategic Solutions. Mr. Wellington's personal bank accounts show minimal independent income beyond his salary from Wellington Consulting, which itself was funded by his wife's business empire. Marcus Wellington, the man who had spent 2 days testifying about his wife's complete financial dependence, had just been revealed as entirely financially dependent on her. Brittany was now sobbing openly, her dream of luxury and security evaporating in real time. She had bet everything on a man who turned out to own nothing, who had been living off the intelligence and business acumen of the woman she had helped him humiliate. Judge Hayworth stared at the defense table with something approaching awe. In 30 years on the bench, she had never witnessed such a complete reversal of apparent reality. Dr. Rodriguez concluded her testimony with clinical precision. "In summary, Your Honor, Mrs. Wellington is the sole architect and owner of a business empire worth approximately $18 million. Mr. Wellington has been an employee of that empire, albeit a well-compensated one, throughout the entirety of their marriage." As Elena stepped down from the witness stand, Marcus Wellington finally understood the full scope of his miscalculation. He had not just underestimated his wife. He had completely failed to recognize that she was the financial genius behind everything he thought he had achieved. The man who had dismissed Rebecca as an unemployed housewife was about to learn that he had been married to one of the most successful businesswomen in the state, and his arrogance had just cost him everything he had never actually owned in the first place. Judge Patricia Hayworth removed her wire-rimmed glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture that seemed to last an eternity in the completely silent courtroom. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of 3 decades of legal experience and barely contained outrage. "Mr. Wellington," she began, her tone sharp enough to cut glass, "in 30 years on this bench, I have rarely witnessed such a profound display of deception and financial abuse. You have spent 2 days painting yourself as a self-made success while systematically attempting to defraud the actual architect of your business empire." Marcus Wellington sat frozen in his chair, his face the color of ash. Beside him, Theodore Blackwood appeared to be contemplating a career change. "The evidence presented by the defense," Judge Hayworth continued, "reveals a pattern of psychological manipulation and financial gaslighting that borders on criminal behavior. You have spent 15 years allowing your wife to build and fund your professional reputation while convincing her and everyone around you that she was merely a dependent spouse." Brittany Morrison began gathering her designer purse, her movements quick and panicked. The woman who had confidently claimed her seat in the front row was now calculating the fastest exit route. Furthermore, Judge Hayworth's voice grew colder. "Your decision to bring your paramour to these proceedings, apparently for the purpose of publicly humiliating the woman who has been financially supporting your lifestyle, demonstrates a level of cruelty that this court finds reprehensible." Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Your Honor, I had no knowledge of these business arrangements. I believed The judge cut him off with a raised hand. Mr. Wellington, ignorance is not a legal defense for fraud. Whether your ignorance was willful or genuine, you have attempted to claim assets that legally and ethically belong entirely to your wife. Theodore Blackwood made one last desperate attempt. Your Honor, my client requests time to review these revelations and perhaps negotiate a settlement. Judge Hayworth's laugh was sharp and humorless. Mr. Blackwood, your client has nothing to negotiate with. He owns nothing. He has built nothing. He has earned nothing beyond the salary his wife generously paid him for 15 years. The ruling came swift and merciless. This court awards Rebecca Chun Wellington 100% of all marital assets. As the evidence clearly demonstrates, she is the sole legitimate owner of said assets. Mr. Wellington's claim to any portion of these holdings is denied in its entirety. Marcus's transformation was complete. The arrogant, dismissive husband had become a broken man staring at the wreckage of his entire life. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table, the only thing keeping him upright. But Judge Hayworth was not finished. Additionally, this court finds that Mr. Wellington's conduct constitutes financial fraud and emotional abuse. Mrs. Wellington is awarded full control of Wellington Consulting, all subsidiary companies, all real estate holdings, all investment accounts, and all personal property purchased with funds from her business empire. The judge's final words carried the finality of a death sentence. Mr. Wellington, you are hereby ordered to vacate the marital residence within 72 hours. You are prohibited from making any business decisions on behalf of Wellington Consulting or any associated entities. Your employment with said companies is terminated effective immediately. The gavel fell with a sound like thunder. In the gallery, the exodus began immediately. David Chamberlain, Marcus's supposed best friend and business partner, was already heading for the door, his phone pressed to his ear as he desperately tried to distance himself from the scandal. Other former friends and associates followed suit, their loyalty evaporating the moment Marcus's usefulness ended. Brittany Morrison didn't even look back. She practically ran from the courtroom, her red dress a blur of panicked retreat. The woman who had smirked while watching Rebecca's humiliation was now fleeing the scene of her own miscalculation. Within hours, she would be telling everyone she barely knew Marcus Wellington. Rebecca Chun Wellington remained seated, her composure intact even in victory. She had endured 15 years of systematic dismissal, 2 days of public humiliation, and had emerged not just vindicated but revealed as the financial mastermind she had always been. Victoria Sterling placed a congratulatory hand on her client's shoulder. You did it, she said quietly. You let them destroy themselves with their own arrogance. Rebecca nodded slowly, watching as Marcus struggled to stand on unsteady legs. For the first time in 15 years, she felt truly seen for who she really was. Marcus Wellington walked out of the courtroom alone, his expensive suit now seeming like a costume he had no right to wear. The man who had entered as a confident businessman was leaving as a revealed fraud, stripped of everything he had never actually earned. The empire he thought he had built belonged entirely to the woman he had spent years calling an unemployed housewife. The business relationships he had claimed as his achievements were products of her strategic brilliance. The wealth he had flaunted was generated by her financial genius. Within hours, the story would spread through their social circle like wildfire. The country club would buzz with whispered conversations about Marcus Wellington's spectacular downfall. Business associates would scramble to maintain relationships with the real power behind Wellington Consulting. Rebecca Chun Wellington, the quiet woman they had all dismissed as pleasantly domestic, had been revealed as one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the state. She had been funding her husband's arrogance for 15 years while building an empire he had been too proud to even notice. The sweetest irony was that Marcus had destroyed himself through his own testimony. His confident assertions about Rebecca's unemployed status had provided the perfect contrast to the devastating truth. He had built the scaffold for his own professional execution. Justice, when it finally came, had been swift, complete, and absolutely merciless. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Rebecca Chun Wellington walked into the executive boardroom of Meridian Strategic Solutions with a confidence that had been 15 years in the making. She no longer hid behind the facade of the pleasant, domestic wife. Her tailored charcoal suit spoke of authority earned, not inherited, and her presence commanded the room in ways that Marcus had only pretended to achieve. The monthly strategy meeting was packed with the same business leaders who had once dismissed her as Marcus's decorative spouse. Now they hung on her every word as she outlined expansion plans that would double their revenue within 2 years. Patricia Holloway, her longtime client and friend, smiled with obvious satisfaction as Rebecca concluded her presentation. I have to say, it's refreshing to finally deal with the real power behind the throne. We should have been having these direct conversations years ago. Rebecca's laugh was warm, but carried an edge of steel. Better late than never, Patricia. Sometimes it takes a public revelation to show people what was always right in front of them. Across town, Marcus Wellington sat in the cramped office of a mid-tier employment agency, his once immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. His expensive suits were the same, but they hung differently on a man who had lost everything. The confident swagger had been replaced by the desperate posture of someone whose options were rapidly dwindling. The employment counselor, a kind but practical woman named Jennifer Marsh, reviewed his resume with barely concealed confusion. Mr. Wellington, your employment history shows 15 years at Wellington Consulting, but our verification calls indicate the company has no record of independent achievements we can substantiate. Every major client relationship appears to have been managed by other parties. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the cheap plastic chair. There were some misunderstandings about reporting structures, he mumbled, the excuse sounding hollow even to himself. Jennifer continued with professional politeness. We've also received some concerning feedback from potential employers who knew about your recent divorce proceedings. The business community is quite small, and word travels quickly about changes in corporate leadership. The truth was that Marcus had become untouchable in their industry. Rebecca's revelation as the true mastermind behind his success had reframed every business relationship he thought he owned. Former colleagues now saw him as either a fraud or an incompetent figurehead, neither of which made for attractive hiring prospects. Meanwhile, Brittany Morrison had discovered that her reputation as a gold-digging opportunist had spread through their social circle with devastating efficiency. The country club that had once welcomed her as Marcus's presumptive future wife now treated her like a cautionary tale. Her attempts to quickly attach herself to other wealthy men had been met with knowing smiles and polite rejection. She had been forced to move back in with her sister, trading her luxury apartment for a pull-out couch and the bitter taste of consequences. The red dress she had worn to celebrate Marcus's anticipated victory now hung in a closet like a monument to her miscalculation. Rebecca's transformation, by contrast, had been nothing short of spectacular. Free from the need to hide her intelligence and business acumen, she had stepped fully into her role as one of the region's most influential entrepreneurs. Business publications that had once featured Marcus now sought interviews with the real architect of the Wellington Empire. Her assistant knocked softly on her office door. "Miss Chun, you have a call from the mayor's office. They're interested in discussing the Economic Development Committee position." Rebecca smiled as she accepted the call, remembering all the years Marcus had claimed such opportunities for himself, while she provided the strategic thinking that made him worthy of consideration. The children had adjusted to the new reality with the resilience that young people often show when authentic truth replaces comfortable lies. They were proud of their mother's business success and seemed relieved to no longer navigate the complex dynamics of their parents' unbalanced relationship. David Chamberlain, Marcus's former business partner and supposed best friend, had moved quickly to distance himself from the scandal. Within weeks of the divorce trial, he had reached out to Rebecca directly, hoping to salvage whatever business relationships could be preserved. His loyalty, it turned out, had always been to success rather than friendship. "Rebecca, I should have recognized your contribution years ago," David admitted during their first direct business meeting. "I was blinded by traditional assumptions about partnership dynamics. I hope we can move forward with a more accurate understanding of how things actually work." Rebecca's response was gracious but firm. "David, I appreciate the acknowledgement. Moving forward, all business relationships will be based on current reality rather than past misconceptions." 6 months later, Marcus Wellington had finally found employment as a junior consultant at a small firm 2 states away, his salary a fraction of what Rebecca had been paying him during their marriage. He worked in a shared office space, his business cards no longer embossed, his expense account non-existent. The irony was not lost on anyone who knew the full story. The man who had spent 15 years dismissing his wife as an unemployed housewife was now struggling to find work, while the woman he had belittled was being courted by Fortune 500 companies seeking her strategic expertise. Rebecca's story became a legend in business circles, whispered in boardrooms, and shared at networking events. The quiet wife who revealed herself as a financial mastermind became a symbol of hidden strength and ultimate vindication. If you've ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed because of assumptions people made about your capabilities, this story probably resonates with you. Have you ever experienced that moment when someone realized they had completely misjudged what you were capable of achieving? Share your own stories of turning the tables on people who counted you out. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is actually the one running the show. The moral lesson was crystal clear to everyone who witnessed Marcus Wellington's spectacular downfall. Arrogance blinds people to reality, cruelty creates enemies, and systematic underestimation of others eventually leads to devastating miscalculation. Rebecca Chen Wellington had spent 15 years letting her husband take credit for her achievements, and when the truth finally emerged, justice was as swift as it was complete. She had played the long game with masterful patience, and her victory was so total that even her enemies had to admire the strategic brilliance of her quiet revolution. The woman they had dismissed as a pleasant housewife had been the architect of an empire all along.